What? That's right. Why'd you keep stopping? No, I'm not gonna open it because you're gonna try to come over and see it. Okay, back. Alright, where was I? I got ashtray. Hold on. I need to be on the motherfucker anyway. Whoa, shit, I'm gonna drop him up. Alright. What was that? In November, still a hypocrite, I accepted an invitation to preach in Mexicali, a Mexican city on the California border. I like that town. Even though I no longer believed what I was preaching, I still enjoyed the travel and the many friends I had south of the border. The night after a service in an Adobe mission in the Mexicali Valley, south of town, I went to bed on a burlap cot in a Sunday school room that doubled as a guest room for visiting preachers. I didn't sleep much that night. I could see some stars out the window, and I remember staring up at the ceiling as if I were gazing right up into outer space, contemplating my place in the universe. It was at that moment that I experienced the startling reality that I was alone, completely and utterly alone. There was no supernatural realm, no God, no devil, no demons, no angels helping me from the other side, no big eyeball judging my thoughts and actions. I am a biological organism in a natural environment, and that is all there is. The stars ingest and recycle matter and energy, and I saw myself as a little low-wattage star glowing faintly in the dark, destined to burn out like a sun after it was spent its fuel. It was simultaneously a frightening and liberating experience. Maybe first-time skydivers or spacewalkers have a similar sensation. I just knew that everything had come to rest, that the struggle was over, that I had truly shed the cocoon, and I was, for the first time in my life, that new creature of which the Bible so ignorantly speaks. I had at last graduated from the childish need to look outside myself to decide who I was as a person. This was no mystical experience, but it was uplifting. It was like learning that the charges against me had been dropped for a crime of which I had been falsely accused. I was free to put the matter aside and get on with my life. I was right at the point of figuring out how to end the charade and come out to the world as an atheist. But in a sense, I'm glad I went through so many months of hypocrisy. I learned something important from that strange vantage point. I remember standing in the pulpit, hearing myself speak words that I no longer believed, seeing the audience react as before. After one service, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Reverend Barker, your sermon was so meaningful. I want you to know that I felt the Spirit of God on your ministry tonight." And I thought, "You did? What does that tell you about the game we're playing?" Of course, I would have said, as many do, that it doesn't matter who speaks the word of God, and that even though I was a non-believer, the message is the same. But this woman told me that she felt the Spirit on my ministry. I realized that the whole sermon/worship setup is a huge drama that we are all acting out. Not just the person in the pulpit, but the audience as self-selected participants, without whom there could be no preaching. We were all playing along with the illusionary meaningfulness of it all. The last time I stood before a congregation as a minister was the following month, during the Christmas week of 1983. I had flown up to San Jose for meetings in one church, and after that, I drove a rental car over to Auburn, northeast of Sacramento, to do a Christmas concert for a young, growing congregation meeting in a public school building. The arrangement was for the Auburn church to provide my plane ticket back to Southern California. They had made a hoopla of the occasion, and I entered the building, and I saw that the church was packed with townfolk. Before the meeting, I met in a side room with the pastors and other leaders of the church, and we all held hands in a circle and prayed for God's blessing on the evening, a very familiar but now strangely foreign ritual. They were especially excited because there was a man in the audience who was in a church for the very first time. The man's name was Harry, and he was out of the town, and he was the town atheist. Okay. Everybody liked Harry. He was a respected businessman who would give you the shirt off his back, but he wasn't a Christian. Harry had recently remarried, and his new wife had become born again and had convinced him to attend church with her for the Christmas concert. Harry came because he loved music and wouldn't be just sitting through a sermon. They were all praying that my ministry would influence Harry that evening, and that Harry would turn his life over to Jesus Christ. They laid hands on me and prayed loudly that God would instill a very special blessing on my ministry so that Harry would be saved. I was dreading the concert, hating myself with every ounce of disdain. As I walked up to the grand piano that was sitting under the spotlight, I tried to scan for Harry, though I had no idea what he looked like. Everyone was seated in near darkness, as if I was singing to a faceless congregation. So in my mind, I was singing to Harry and to Harry alone. I went through the motions and performed my songs, thinking how utterly stupid they were and how ridiculous I must be sounding to Harry. Between songs, I did my patter, tiny sermonettes that tied things together. It was one of the most difficult things I had ever had to do in my life. It took a tremendous effort just to get the words out, words that I no longer believed. It can still make me cry to think back on that moment. At a couple of points, I just stopped talking, deadly silent, blank as a new sheet of paper. The audience must have thought that the Holy Spirit was moving in my soul. I somehow managed to fall back on showmanship and willed myself to continue. At one point near the end of the concert, I almost lost it. I was singing some of my particularly dumb lyrics and almost stopped right in the middle of the song to say, "This is crap." I wanted to turn to the audience and say, "Harry, you're right. I'm sorry. There is no God, and this is just mumbo jumbo nonsense." But I avoided that dramatic possibility and somehow, like Pagliacci, got through the performance. Besides, they hadn't yet given me my plane ticket back home, so, Afterward, certain people were invited over to the pastor's home for Christmas refreshments. Harry and his wife showed up. I guess that this was supposed to be my opportunity to lay it on Harry and convert him to Jesus. But I didn't talk to Harry at all that night, except maybe to shake his hand. I was so ashamed of myself, so embarrassed at how we were treating this man, singling him out and like he had made a social disease or whatever the fuck. I sat near the Christmas tree. Harry sat across the room in an armchair, and I avoided eye contact. How I was wishing everything were different, that I was really free and grown up, and that he and I could just get together and talk. I don't know if I would have liked Harry or not. I don't know if he would have had anything profound to say or if he would have even cared about my dilemma. But I respected the man immensely. He had the courage to be different. Something during the little party, the pastor spoke up and said something about how nice it was for all of us to get together to celebrate the birth of the Savior. And Harry, in a loud voice, immediately said, "Not all of us." He was fearless. He seemed proud to be identified as an atheist and happy to be an independent thinker. The sermons and songs of the thousands of dedicated Christians I had ever known did not measure up to that one simple and brave comment spoken by an unbeliever. I never preached another sermon. I never accepted another invitation to perform a religious concert, and to be fair to myself and everyone else, I knew I had to cut it off quickly and cleanly. In January 1984, I wrote a letter to everyone I could think of: ministers, friends, relatives, publishing companies, Christian recording artists, fellow missionaries, breaking it off for good, telling them that I was no longer a Christian, that I was an atheist or agnostic. The distinction was clear in my mind then, that I would no longer accept invitations to preach or perform Christian music, and that I hoped we could keep a dialogue open. I remember that moment, hesitating for a few seconds in the mailbox before, right outside of Chaffee High School in Ontario, California, holding those dozens of envelopes in my hand and thinking, this is it. Dropping those letters into the slot was a million times more satisfying than any religious experience, because it was real. The fallout. Yeah, Harry was pretty cool. My letters were mailed. Every important person in my life would soon know that I was no longer a Christian, and I walked away from that mailbox a free person. I knew there would be more strong responses, but I wasn't afraid. I had made my own free choice, and no believer in the world would deny me that freedom. You can believe if you don't have the freedom not to believe. Here's the letter I mailed, dated January 16th, 1984, to more than 50 colleagues, friends, and family members. I said, "Dear friends, you probably already know that I've gone through some significant changes regarding spiritual things. The past 5 or 6 years have been a time of deep revelation for me. And during the last couple of months, I have decided that I can no longer honestly call myself a Christian. You can probably imagine that it's been an agonizing process for me. I was raised in a good Christian home, served in missions and evangelism, went to a Christian college before became ordained, and ministered in 3 churches as assistant pastor. During those years, I was 100% convinced of my faith, and now I am just about 100% unconvinced. The purpose of this letter is not to present my case. Yet I will point out that my studies have brought me through many important areas, most notably the authenticity of the Bible, faith versus reason, church history, and a bunch of other fun subjects like evolution, physics, psychology, self-esteem, philosophy, parapsychology, pseudoscience, mathematics, etc. I'm not sure what the purpose of this letter is, except to serve as a point of information to a friend or relative whom I consider to be important in my life, and with whom I could not bear to be dishonest. I have not thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I still basically maintain the same Christian values of kindness, love, giving, temperance, and respect that I was raised with. Christianity has much good, yet I feel I can demonstrate an alternate, rational basis for those values outside of a system of faith and authority. Of course, I admit those values cannot save me from the fires of hell, but it is irrational to hold a fear of something which is non-existent and to allow that fear to dominate one's philosophy and way of life. If the Bible is true, I will run to it willingly. If there is a God, I would be silly to deny him. In fact, the little child in me still sometimes wishes to regain the comforts and reassurances of my former beliefs. I am a human being with the same fears and feelings we all share. The Bible says those who seek will find. Well, you know me. I am constantly seeking, and I have not found. Right now, I'm somewhere between the agnostic and the atheist, although I have spent a great deal of time in both camps. There is much more to say, and I would greatly appreciate any input you can offer. I would suggest, though, that before we attempt any meaningful dialogue, we should understand as much as possible about each other's thoughts. If you wish, I will send you any of various papers I am preparing, including the Bible, faith versus reason, and finally, I'm not your enemy. Our enemy is the one who doesn't care about these subjects, who thinks that you and I are silly to be concerned with life and values. I intend no disrespect to you or anyone who, or anyone who is genuinely interested in religion and philosophy. It is the non-thinker who bothers me and with whom meaningful interaction is impossible. Dan Barker. Today, I would write a completely different letter, but that's where I was at the time, in the process of changing one worldview for another. Today, I would point out that the Christian values I found to be praiseworthy are simply human values, and that not all Christian values are good. In fact, no values that are exclusively Christian are admirable. The little child nostalgia lasted about a year and has been replaced with embarrassment that I ever believed or missed my belief. The definitions of agnosticism and atheism have been clarified, but that letter is a perfect snapshot of who I was, and reading it again brings back many of those old feelings. It wasn't long until the reactions started coming in, and they were all across the board. Some were predictable, but others surprised me. Sorry to hear about your recent commitment to be uncommitted to the Lamb of God that you so beautifully had written about and put to music in such a successful way, wrote Assembly of God pastor Mark Griffo. Mark was one of the kids in the choir I had directed at Glen Grove Assembly. I had encouraged him to enter the ministry over the objections of his family, and we had served as missionaries together in Mexico. I realize you're not my enemy, as you stated, but Satan is. He's out to rob, kill, and destroy life. My heart tears within me trying to figure out the answer you'll give your children when they ask you. Dan, can you write more songs so my future children can know the source of love, Jesus Christ, like you do? I'm praying for you always and looking forward to your resurrection. To Mark, I'm dead, essentially. Mark's wife, Debbie, was less charitable. Meaningful interaction you want? There's nothing meaningful about the beliefs that you have chosen. I'm sorry that the Lamb you once wrote about is no longer Lord of your life. To really know the Almighty God, Savior, King, all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving creator of you and I, is to never leave him. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord. There's that recurrent theme. I was faking my Christian life, but apparently she's not. David Gustafson, director of Youth with a Missions Pacific and Asian Christian University in Hawaii, and one-time pastor at Glen Grove Assembly, wrote, I was somewhat shocked by your letter. I guess I'll just have to pray harder. I believe an acid test is to simply cry out to God and ask him to radically and ruthlessly correct you if you're wrong. It would be better for God to use any means to show you the truth than for you to find out and you have been misled and be too late. I've read your papers, and of course, they present a good case. I wouldn't expect anything else from someone as brilliant as you. I think the contradiction is in the Bible show the beauty of God speaking through frail humanity, and yet keeping the main message of the Bible intact. I sent Dave an exhaustive response, telling him that I had indeed prayed exactly as he suggested and congratulating him for the surprising and honest acknowledgement that there are truly contradictions in the Bible. He replied by sending me a box of 14 cassette tapes from a theologian. I had penned a note at the bottom of my letter to Gospel Light Publications, telling everyone there that I would understand if they decided not to continue working with me. We were in the middle of another VBS mini musicale project. Wes Haysted wrote, thanks for honestly sharing your journey with me. I promise not to start bombarding you with tracks and Josh McDowell books. As to our continuing to work together, I'll vote aye. Provided, of course, that you get me 3 songs for Sunrise Island real quick. Sort of sounds like schedule takes precedent over principles, eh? Actually, I value highly your talent, your sensitivity, your flexibility, and your friendship. Therefore, I hope we can continue working together until one of us converts the other, or you feel the goals of our projects are incompatible with your directions. I reluctantly agreed to finish the project, feeling it would have been unprofessional to back out of a business agreement, but asked if I could use a pseudonym to save us both the embarrassment. So, if you ever see the Sunrise Island Vacation Bible School musical written by Edwin Daniels, you will know that an atheist composed it. Writing those songs, I confess, was a strange experience. I felt like a total hypocrite. To the defense of Gospel Light, Wes did tell me that they thought I was merely going through a stage, a spiritual crisis, and that he was certain I would come back to Christ. We cannot accuse Gospel Light of knowingly hiring a non-believer because everyone there thought I was a Christian when we started the project. Regardless, I can testify that the creation of such music, which the religious publisher accepted and was performed by believers in churches and Christian schools around the country, was purely artistic craftsmanship and not inspired by faith. Hal Spencer, president of Man of Music, wrote, "My immediate response is that this can't be true and that you're only going through a doubting time of your life. However, knowing you, I'm afraid that there's more to it than that. I'll be asking the Lord to guide me also, and if there's something that I can say which might influence your feelings, I'd like to know what that is." Hal and I met Hal and I met for lunch a couple of months later, and I got to hear what the Lord guided him to say. Although he is quite knowledgeable about the music industry, he had not given much thought to theology or philosophy. He kept pointing to a leaf and a flower arrangement next to our table, saying, "How did that leaf get here?" After I pointed out the problem with the traditional design and first cause arguments, he turned back to the leaf and said, "But I just can't imagine how that leaf got here without a creator." We later bumped into each other in Nashville when I was there for my first public debate, and Hal was attending a country gospel music award ceremony. The chance meeting was so surprising that he quipped, "See, this proves there is a God." Man had kept selling my musicals for many years, and Hal continued to treat me professionally. Eli Peralta was my 9th grade Spanish teacher and a member of the Peralta Brothers Quartet, with whom I administered during high school. He wrote, "Thank you for letting us know the status of your life change. Rest assured that the pureness and clarity of your communication is being accepted in a spirit of love and consideration. It's significant that in the days prior to your letter arriving, I was reminiscing about our fellowship and friendship of years gone by and wishing that we could visit sometime. My brothers and I still think of you with many fond memories, and I think of the fun times we had together. I've informed them regarding your journey from faith to reason, and even though it's made a significant emotional impact on us, I, for one, feel a deep sense of calm and still consider ourselves friends. Eli never had an unkind cell in his body. This is a true friendship." Jill Johnson, wife of the music minister at the Auburn, California church, where I did my first Christian concert and preaching, sent me a surprisingly tolerant letter. She said, quote, I totally support your sincere desire to seek out the truth and love. I feel for you because in a certain sense, the decision you've made has got to be a cataclysmic event, not only for you and those you love, but also to so many outside your home and sphere. But I believe in honesty, and since you believe with all of your being in what you espouse, I'm sure it's a necessity for you to continue following this path. When you break the rules, there are always those who will have a desire or need to push or judge or condemn. And I just hope and pray most people will be gentle with you, even though you and they are not in agreement. I'm so happy that I was able to hear you in concert, and I have no doubt that you will continue to create beauty in spheres other than the Christian one. I guess I was a good showman. Jill had heard that final performance and suspected nothing, but neither did I suspect she would be so understanding, which may be a signal that not all fundamentalists are as intolerant as their God. Lauren McBain, pastor of the First Baptist Church of Ontario, California, which my family was attending and where I had briefly served as interim music director, wrote, quote, I'd really like to stay in touch with you, if only for lunch once in a while. I'd especially be happy to play chess with you when you want. The odds now clearly in my favor since God will be on my side. Perhaps with patience and running thin, the same man wrote a less friendly letter 10 months later. You and I both know, Dan, that you have heard and you fully understand God's rules for living, and that you are now living by your own rules. I understand them as simple disobedience. I later heard that he felt bad about that second letter, which effectively shut the door on our friendship. A co-worker in Christian music and children's books, Scotty Domage wrote, does this mean that we won't be seeing each other at Music California? I'm not offended or at the least bit surprised by your journey from faith to reason. Your questioning has surfaced in many different ways when we have been together. I do feel some sadness and wonder what hurt and deep disappointments have precipitated your journey from faith to reason. That is another theme I have heard a lot. Who hurt you, or how were you hurt? Although my deconversion to atheism was intellectual, not emotional, I suppose it is true that I suffered some deep disappointments. I was initially saddened, for example, to learn that the Bible is not as reliable as I had been taught to believe it was. So yeah, it hurt to know that I had been deceived, deliberately or innocently, by people whom I had trusted. But my problem was not with those people. It was with the truth of the claims of Christianity. Shirley and Verlin Cox had regularly helped me arrange meetings in Indiana. I must admit to a bit of shock, Shirley wrote. At first, I wanted to write a preachy letter to you, but after much reflection and prayer, I realized you know more Bible than I and Verlin will ever know. We hadn't been through college the way you have. Yes, we are brokenhearted that you've rejected our Lord, but we have hope and our prayers will continue. While in Florida last year, we were delighted to see your Mary Had a Little Lamb, and churches in Indiana are still present. Churches in the Indiana area still present it. Oh yes, Mary Had was a puppet show on TV. I received a letter from Sister Tammy Scheinhofen, of whom I had no memory. About 8 years ago, you were instrumental in my accepting Jesus as my personal savior. I thank God that I am a jewel placed in your crown. Don't let the enemy take away or tarnish your crown. She was referring to the belief that Christians will someday rule the universe alongside God. Hence, we will all be wearing a kingly crown or queenly. But doesn't this make it a status symbol for real? Like my crown has more jewels than yours. Like, get the fuck out of here. One of my best friends was a man who was largely responsible for the promotional success of my musicals, a strong Christian who had little need for organized religion. It wasn't easy for him being gay in a fundamentalist community. He wrote, I don't know if I can say I enjoyed your letter. There must be a better word. I know how you feel. I've surely been there myself. May still be there. What struck me so forcefully was the realization that the Christians react to your questioning as they do, not because you have lost your faith, but because you have lost their faith. That's a great line. It would have been just as bad if I had converted to Islam or Mormonism, but he was wrong. I had actually lost faith, not just someone else's faith, but the very concept of faith as a valid tool of knowledge. Well, no, I had not lost faith. Actually, I discarded it. I threw it away, rejected its value. I wouldn't say I lost my cancer or that an illness is something to be missed. However, I'm certain that to this friend, my commitment to rationality was a kind of faith or substitute for faith. And in that context, his remarks were meaningful. I heard from many people to whom I had not mailed my letter, so the gossip must have been flying. Many of the letters were sincere, but without content. I don't have any answers, wrote one friend. It's not a matter of logic or intelligence, wrote another. Human intellectual ability and capacities, no matter how great, are not sufficient, wrote a woman of faith healer. Many of the letters contained ad hominem arguments. One coworker told me that I had given in to the desires of self-life. What other kind of life is there? And a neighbor wrote that I must be hurt and bitter. Another tried to get me to admit my deep wounds. A woman preacher announced that someone along the way you became angry with God. Oh, sometime along the way I must have became angry with God. If true, well, why is that my problem? A former co-pastor told me that you're on a selfish journey at the expense of your own integrity. How does he define integrity? Like Roxanne Olson, the high school-aged daughter of one of my close Christian friends, living in a missionary compound, wrote, I can't say I pray for you every day because I don't. Right now in school, we are learning biology from a teacher who only knows about philosophy, medieval history, and English literature. How do you think we got on this planet? I wrote to her and her mother, who were living in a community operated by the charismatic evangelistic organization Youth with a Mission in Kona, Hawaii, and I challenged the school to a debate on the issues. I never heard a thing from them about that. A few weeks after my letter was sent out, I received a call from the vice president and dean of academic instruction at Azusa Pacific University, Dr. Don Grant. He and the director of alumni affairs met with me for lunch one afternoon to see what had gone wrong with one of their emissaries. Don had been the director of the Dynamics Chorale, for which I played piano and sang on scholarship during my years at Azusa Pacific. It was an amicable lunch, but they nevertheless were fishing for some way to get me back in the fold. The conversation was at more was at a more articulate level than most, but when I offered rebuttals that they had never heard, they fell back on the same old ad hominem responses, psychological guesswork, and so on. As we were walking back to our cars, I thanked them for their time and willingness to discuss the issues, and I made them a challenge. I told them that I would be willing to participate in a debate at Azusa Pacific against any one of their professors on the question of the existence of God. I never heard from them again. A few months earlier, before he received my letter, Manuel Bonilla had told me that he just knew the Spirit of God was in my life, especially since I had recorded an unusually inspired arrangement on one of his albums that year, playing the piano with conviction and spirit behind his singing. We talked on the phone after he received my letter, and I asked Manuel if he would be surprised to know that while I was performing that song, I was a secret atheist and that my inspiration was musical, not spiritual. He didn't say a word. When I talked with Manuel again in 1985, he was friendly, but told me that he would be willing to offer me some counseling to help me get through my struggles. The only thing I could think of was to say that I was happy and to thank him for his friendship. Manuel and I met again in Tucson in 2003 and talked about the possibility of my producing a secular children's album for him that could be sold in schools, but it never happened. The thought of it becoming known that he was working with an atheist must have been too much. I do receive a nice seasonal greeting card from Manuel and Anita every year, and I still consider them to be gentle friends. Shortly after my letters were sent out, I met for lunch with Bob and Myrna Wright, two very close friends at the time. Bob was the pastor who conducted my ordination ceremony. They told me that they wanted to apologize to me. They were sorry they had not sensed my inner struggles leading up to my rejection of Christianity. If they had known, they said, perhaps they could have helped me avoid the discouragement and disappointment that led to my change of views. This was a difficult meeting because I loved and respected these people, and I knew that they were sincere. I told them that my deconversion had nothing to do with any personal problems, that it had to do with the nature and content of the Christian message itself. I told them that inner struggles are good, and I tried to explain that ad hominem counseling was beside the point. They didn't get it. What would happen to me, I asked, if I were to die right now? They were silent. Bob, you're an ordained minister. You know the Bible. What happens to unbelievers? Well, the Bible says they go to hell, he responded. You know me, I continued. I'm not a bad person. I'm honest. If I walk out in this restaurant and get killed by a truck, will I go straight to hell? They didn't want to answer that question, squirming in their seats. Well, do you believe the Bible? I pressed. Of course, Myrna said. Then will I go to hell? Yes, they finally answered, but not without a great deal of discomfort. Perhaps it was not the best lunch topic or the most diplomatic way to treat friends, but I wanted to make the brutality of Christianity real to them. I knew it would be hard for them to imagine their God punishing someone like me. I later heard that they were perturbed with me for having coerced them to say I was going to hell. It forced them to acknowledge that as much as we wanted to be friends, their religion considers me the enemy. The letters I received and the conversations that followed my coming out displayed love, hatred, and everything in between. Many friendships were lost, others were changed, and still others were strengthened. Of all of the attempts to get me back in the fold, not a single one had any intellectual impact. Although I was saddened at having discontinued some relationships, I found I didn't miss them. I didn't think I was smarter than these people were. We just chose different priorities and grew apart. I suppose it was something like a divorce. Even though there were good times and happy memories, once it's over, it's over. I'll tell you, this is a great way to test your friendships. Imagine doing this yourself. If you're an atheist, try telling your friends that you've become a born-again preacher. If you're a lifelong Republican, announce that you have switched parties. How many of your friends would you say would stay your friends? Some undoubtedly would, because your friendship is a true horizontal peer relationship of unconditional admiration and enjoyment of each other's person. But some of them would not, because you and they would learn that the arrangement was contingent on something external to the relationship, such as belonging to the same club, faction, philosophy, or religion. As soon as that external link disappears, so does the artificial bond that brings you together. That's when the friendship loses its point. But this is good, because then you know who your friends are. If they were true friends, they would have gladly accommodated your freedom of choice, even if it made them uncomfortable. You can't lose something that wasn't there in the first place. Few of the letters offered any defense of Bible contradictions. No one presented any documentary evidences from the first century that offered a single rational argument for the existence of a God beyond the, well, where did we come from garden variety. I know there are stronger arguments, and I deal with them later, but most of the negative responses centered on things like humility, shame, attitude, prayer, in short, spiritual intimidation. I never heard from Reverend Milton Barfoot, the pastor at Glen Grove Assembly of God, but my brother Daryl told me he had spoken briefly with him about me, and all he could say was, "But isn't Dan afraid of hell?" That's it. Of all the things this learned, ordained minister could utter in response to honest intellectual searching, the first thing he thought of was hell. Oh gosh, now I see it. I should stop questioning and just be afraid, I guess. Dave Gustafson's challenge to cry out to God was nothing less than intellectual dishonesty. One of my friends asked me simply to pretend that Jesus is real and he will make himself real to you. Had either of them ever tried crying out to Buddha or pretend that Allah is real? An acid test of their existence. These people were asking me to lie to myself. They should have known better. They should have known that I had already cried out to God and that I had frequently prayed and felt the Spirit within me. It is easy to produce or coax inner feelings, and it happens in all religions. They didn't seem to realize that I was not seeking inner confirmation. I was seeking objective external evidence. And isn't pretending Jesus is real simply begging the question? Even if I had managed to fake it by pretending to pray to a being in whom I don't believe, would an omniscient God not know that's what I was doing? And why should I have ever had to ask in the first place? Why doesn't God simply reveal himself to everyone? And even faking it, as they must have imagined I was doing or could do, why did God not respond? Their challenge actually backfired. Thanks, I tried it and it failed. There is no God. The almost universal tone of the letters and conversations was that I was the one with the problem. None acknowledged that my change of mind might be an incident of Christianity, and it might be an indictment of Christianity itself. Some of them formerly had come to me for counseling, but now they no longer wanted to learn from me. They all assumed that the challenge then at hand was to get me back. Even the few who did ask to read my papers were never commenting on them except superficially. Although I expected this, it was a strange feeling to be demoted from a respected authority to a problem child. I suppose if I had learned less or stopped learning altogether, I would still have had the trappings of clerical credibility. But no thanks. Here's one emperor who did not want the clothes or want to be emperor at all. I don't know if any of these people have since moderated their views, but I do know that none of them remain the same. You can't avoid being affected when one of your colleagues challenges the very core of your beliefs. Although this long-term fallout from my friends and coworkers is hard to know, the effect on my family was much more dramatic. My parents had moved to Arizona, and when they got my letter, they were shocked. They had been proud of their son's work as an ordained minister and evangelist, and of my reputation as a Christian songwriter. Not knowing anything about my gradual interchange, the announcement came as a total surprise. My sweet mother, a Sunday school teacher in Apache Junction, immediately hopped on a bus traveling from Phoenix to my home in California to see firsthand what had happened to her son. We had a long, emotional discussion into the early hours in the morning. I don't remember much of what was said that night, but Mom later reminded me that we opened the Bible and read some of the horrible stories about the petty and cruel God of Scripture. And I had said, Mom, you are a good person. Do you really want to teach this awfulness to children? The God of the Bible is a monster. You are nicer than that. She would never be the same, but it wasn't until much later that I learned the long-term effects of that visit. At the time, I did not want to become a reverse evangelist to my own parents. So after that meeting, I refrained from pressuring them to change their opinions. I mean, family's family after all. My mother tells me that after that meeting, she was stunned by the dissonance. Backing off to get some perspective, she stopped going to church. In a Wisconsin Magazine article on July 28, 1991, journalist Bill Loiters quotes my mother, Pat Barker, as she recalled our late night meeting, quote, "The answers he gave me impressed my heart and mind. I had so much love for my son that I knew in some way he was right. One morning, as she was watering her desert garden, Mom saw a dead bird on the ground, and she thought, how sad. As she looked closer, she saw that its flesh was being attacked by a mob of ants. How horrible! That pretty little songbird had come to a gruesome fate. Then she remembered all those years she had sung, 'His eye is on the sparrow,' praising God for his watchfulness. 'I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me.' Here on the ground was evidence that God's eye was not on the sparrow at all. If there were a God, his eye was at that moment on the ants and microbes feasting on the bird's misfortune. But then everything in nature could be someone else's breakfast, so the only eye is the impersonal eye of natural selection, which is a process of survival, not the result of cosmic parental care. On her own, she came to the same realization that I had come to on that cot in Mexicali. The realization that we are simply naturally evolved biological organisms in an amoral material environment, and that if there is any caring to be done, we are the ones to do it. All those years she was singing, 'His eye is on the sparrow.' It was actually her eye that was on me and my brothers. She was a wonderful mother. Within weeks, Mom concluded that religion was, quote, just a bunch of baloney, as she told the reporter. She felt a, quote, tremendously great disappointment in God, began to do some reading and thinking of her own, and eventually started calling herself an atheist. 'I don't have to hate anymore,' she said happily. That's amazing. Wow. I mean, that's amazing that she genuinely saw religion, and specifically Christianity, as an excuse to hate people. Interesting. Because I see it the same way. One fact that surprised my mother was that no one in her church ever seemed to care about her departure. She had been a member of the Assembly of God for years, had performed in the choir, had sung solos regularly in services, was faithfully teaching Sunday school, and had participated in many other functions. The only incident out of the ordinary after leaving the church was an embarrassing moment when she was grabbed at the supermarket by an older woman who was shaking, speaking in tongues, and praying to cast the devil out of my mother. This only confirmed my mother's newfound opinion that religion is a bunch of baloney. It took my dad a little longer. That's kind of weird because it's statistically the other way around. But anyway, it took my dad a little longer. When he got my letter, he ran down to the church altar and poured out his heart to God. He enlisted the assistance of church members to pray for me. The pastor laid hands on Dad, asking God for a special blessing during this trial of faith. At first, Dad, the Bible school alumnus, tried to argue with me in a friendly and fatherly way and mailed me many pages of correspondence on the issues, which I answered promptly. Eventually, he relented, due probably more to Mom and Daryl's influence than mine. He began to read the other side and eventually came to respect the reasoning of free thinkers, philosophers, and scientists. The same Wisconsin Magazine article quotes my father, Norman, discussing how he dealt with his son's change of views. I tried to straighten him out. It worked the other way around. After Dad stopped believing in God, he was amazed at how quickly his Christian friends turned on him. I used to think it was a tough thing to be a Christian in this big, bad world. You want to see something interesting? Try not being one. He reports, I'm much happier now to be free from superstition and fear and guilt from the sin complex. To be able to think freely and objectively is a tremendous relief. One of the immediate benefits to my dad was his reclamation of music. Back in the 1950s, when he and Mom became born again, Dad abandoned his musical career, threw away his collection of swing recordings, turned his back on his quote-unquote sinful life, and played his trombone only in church. He had come to view popular, worldly music as a threat to spiritual health and godly morality. Dance bands encouraged a carnal lifestyle. When he finally gave up religion, he was free to come back home to his talent, but this didn't happen in one clean break. Before completely leaving the church, Dad began to play his trombone in big bands in the Phoenix area, reconnecting with the delicious life he had abandoned almost 40 years ago. He didn't tell anyone at church because he knew they would disapprove. Resist the temptations of the world, one 4th of July. When Dad was playing at a party, a TV crew showed up to cover the event. The next day, the pastor's wife called my dad to ask, "Norman, did I see you on TV last night?" Ha! The all-seeing eye of God. Dad would not continue this double life for long. One evening, he drove to church, took his trombone case out of the car, and walked toward the building. He could hear the praying, singing, and preaching. When he got to the door, it struck him that he did not belong in that alien world anymore. Hoping that no one would notice, he quickly turned around, got back in the car, and drove home, never to return. He traded onward Christian soldiers for don't get around much anymore. I suppose it was implicit, but I never suggested to my parents that they should become atheists. They did their own thinking. They decided to investigate the issues for themselves, and it's exciting to see what happened in their lives. I don't think it's possible to pull someone out of religion if they don't want to go. My parents later admitted that they made some mistakes in raising 3 boys in a fundamentalist household. My mother says that their motivation was to do the right thing. In spite of the religious overkill, I had a very enjoyable childhood. Sure, we were indoctrinated with an illegitimate and intolerant worldview, but my parents were decent, caring people in spite of their faith. They raised me with good principles. One thing they taught me by example is that you should never be ashamed to speak what you think is the truth. That lesson has stayed with me my entire life. When Daryl got my letter, he was shocked at first, but then he got excited. Daryl had been an almost skeptic for many years, not knowing exactly what he believed, but covering the bases. I had almost thought he was a borderline Christian. His whole attitude to Christianity, he later told me, was exactly how much sin can I commit and still get to heaven. I did not convert my brother to atheism. In reality, his big toe was already across the line. Daryl said that when he heard his big brother, his ordained minister, Christian songwriting big brother, articulate Christian criticism of Christianity, it suddenly legitimized and crystallized all of those unspoken and unformed questions he had been carrying around for years. It made it okay to doubt. If Dan can say it, then so can I. When I gave him a book on humanism, he said, "That's what I am. I never knew it until now, but I'm a humanist." For a while, though, Daryl was uncomfortable with the word atheist. He once asked to accompany me to a meeting of atheists in Los Angeles, then almost changed his mind before coming in. A year or two later, Daryl became one of the chapter's directors of that group, Atheists United. He went on to complain about violations of state and church separation in Redlands and San Bernardino. He became a plaintiff in a successful lawsuit protesting county ownership and maintenance of a Christian theme park on public property. Daryl is a successful salesman, and he has learned to put his considerable skills of persuasion to good use. My folks told me that Daryl was a solid support for them when they were going through their initial disillusionment with religion. It's helpful to have someone to talk to during times like this, and Daryl caught them regularly to compare notes and cheer them up in their journey out of faith. Today, with more fervor and skill than he ever exhibited as a Christian, Daryl is a walking, driving advertisement for freedom of thought. He often plays free thought music and initiates skeptical conversations with passengers on the airport shuttle van he owns. The change in my parents and in Daryl was tremendously heartening. I never would have predicted such an outcome. My parents had been fervent disciples of Jesus for years, and Daryl had been a street preacher with Christians in Action, a missionary evangelism organization. He confesses now that he joined that group mainly to wrangle an early discharge from the Marine reserves on a ministerial basis. He didn't want to fight in Vietnam. I should have known that in a family built around the true love and acceptance, there's nothing to fear. The fact that these born-again, door-to-door preachers were open to change gives me hope. Some values are truly transcendent in the natural sense, rising above religious walls. Humans' love, kindness, and intelligence are better than belief and superior to superstition. My other brother, Tom, is still a born-again Christian. He gave his life to Jesus at a Billy Graham crusade in the early 1960s. And after some rocky high school and college years, including a shockingly bad semester at Oral Roberts University, he rededicated his life to God. He's a good man, a loving father, hardworking and conscientious, now a retired high school principal still living in California. He and his wife make occasional missionary trips to Mexico in support of their faith. Although Tom and I never really been that close, we enjoy seeing each other, and the subject of religion rarely comes up. I sometimes refer to Tom as the white sheep of the family. My maternal grandmother was an uneducated, lovingly eccentric, and generous woman whose views on religion fluctuated according to her medication. She and I were very close. When she received my letter, she must have been torn apart with the issue, writing, I won't give in to the devil. Okay. Later, she wrote me again in a more charismatic mood, saying, you sure don't have to defend yourself to me. You are a good man, one of the best I've ever seen, and I'm thankful for that. I just stay open-minded and try to live a good life. That's all I can do. A few years later, she told me that she had scared off some Jehovah's Witnesses at her front door, growling, get out of here, I'm an atheist. I don't think she really was an atheist because at other times she spoke about God and Jesus in her life, but at least she became more broad-minded. To a large degree, this was due to the change in my parents. My dad's mother was living in Oklahoma. After Granddad died in 1986, she and I worked on a 4-year project publishing Paradise Remembered, a book of Granddad's collected stories of life as a Delaware Indian boy in Indian territory before Oklahoma became a state. She was a member of the Christian church her entire life. When she happened to see one of my appearances as an atheist on the Oprah Winfrey Show, she wrote me a postcard saying, I saw you on TV. That is not our Danny. In spite of that understandable awkwardness, we got along wonderfully. My Uncle Keith, Dad's younger brother, was a recovering alcoholic who credited his sobriety to his deep faith in God. He had arranged for me to be hired in my first job as a computer programmer, designing monitoring systems for tank farms. And he was excited to be working not only with a family member, but with another strong Christian, he thought, as well. The job started in 1983, just when I had given up my faith, but he didn't know it because I was still hypocritically preaching on the weekends. When he received my letter, he didn't reply. We continued to work together as if nothing had happened, and I left it at that. One day, as we were driving back to Southern California from a computer show in Vegas, he pointed to a huge rock formation in the landscape and said, "Isn't that beautiful?" I looked at it for a moment and said, "Yeah, it is beautiful. You can see how the multicolored ancient sedimentary seabeds were thrust upward after millions of years of tectonic pressure and are now tilted at an improbable angle." He turned to me and snapped, "Do you have to ruin everything?" I appreciate and respected Uncle Keith immeasurably. Dad's two other brothers responded in a friendly and civil manner to the drastic change in our views, but Keith ended up ostracizing both of us, refusing to answer letters. I went on to another programming job and never saw Keith again. After I mailed him a copy of Paradise Remembered, his own dad's memoirs, which was received with excitement and gratitude by the rest of the family, he sent it back to me without explanation. I can only assume, as he once implied to Dad on the phone before breaking it off with us, that he was unwilling to associate with his unclean nephew. My Christian marriage did not last either. When I told Carol that I was writing this book, she asked me not to say anything about her. I suggested that it would be strange, even insulting, if I cut her completely out of the story. So she asked me to keep it to a minimum. Carol had always wanted me to be married to a minister. Carol had always wanted to be married to a minister, and although she tried to adapt as much as possible to my change, she could only bend so far without breaking. She was ultimately unwilling to be disloyal to her faith. From her point of view, the Bible commands Christians to be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. From my point of view, having become aware of feminism, egalitarianism, and freedom of opinion, I could no longer imagine a marriage in which the man is the quote-unquote head of the wife, as the Bible sets it up. Divorce is always painful, but we were fortunate that it was not too messy. We did not have much property to fight about, and neither of us wanted to fight anyway. She remains a faithful believer and is now married to a Baptist minister, as she continues to see that as her role in life. Around this same time, I read Annie Laurie Gaylor's book, Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So, published by the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which details the harm to women that stems directly from biblical teachings. And I wrote a letter of thanks telling her a little of my story. 3 years later, we were married. And it's one of our little stories that she never responded to that first letter. She lost it, but her mother, Ann Gaylor, who was president of the foundation, found the letter and sent me a nice note asking me if I would write an article for Free Thought Today about my deconversion. That article, I Just Lost Faith in Faith, ran in the summer of 1984. A few months later, Ann and Annie Laurie were invited to be guests on Oprah Winfrey's AM Chicago show. At about this time, Oprah was beginning to be noticed nationally. She was doing a show about atheism and asked Ann if she knew of any other atheists with good stories to tell. So Ann told her about this former minister in California. The producers called me and I jumped on a plane to Chicago to be one of the guests on the show. Not only was that the first time I publicly spoke about my atheism, on television no less, but that was also the first time I had knowingly talked with any other atheists. I was nervous, not because of being on TV. I had done a lot of Christian television, but because this was the first time I would be speaking to an audience that was not supportive and even might be hostile. I met Ann and Annie Laurie before the show that morning, talked briefly with Oprah in the green room, and then went out before the cameras. We actually have videotaped of that day we met. On the tape, you can see that we are checking each other out. They were a little worried about me, wondering if I would falter or be too soft in my atheism, and I was a little apprehensive about exactly what kind of people these outspoken atheists would be. During the show, you can see us all relax as we all realized that we were among friends. Computer programming became the perfect transitional job for me until I was able to go to work from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. In 1985, the company I was working with moved me to the Midwest to be close to the railroad dispatching systems we were installing in Indiana and Illinois. That job was fun. We moved real trains on real tracks using a custom real-time multitasking system, one of the tasks which I designed myself. I lived in hotels most of that year and was able to drive up to the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin on weekends and rare days off, and gradually started volunteering there. In 1986, as the railroad systems were needing less maintenance, I decided to stay in Madison and work on a contract basis for the foundation, designing and installing its first computer system. In May 1987, Annie Laurie and I were married. The Free Thought feminist wedding, a match not made in heaven, took place in Sauk City, Wisconsin, at historic Freedom Thought Hall. A woman judge wearing purple shoes with her judicial robe conducted the ceremony, announcing at the critical time, "You may now kiss the groom." The next month, I was hired full-time as public relations director for the foundation. That's one way to get a job, marry the boss's daughter. In 2004, Annie Laurie and I were elected co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is today the largest organization of atheists and agnostics in the country. Our daughter, Sabrina, was born in 1989, a fourth-generation freethinker on her mother's side of the family, and in spite of her red hair and light complexion, a full member of the Delaware Lenape tribe of American Indians. I am a member from my dad's side of my family. We also have some Chiricahua Apache blood. I guess that's how you say it. Chiricahua. I'm assuming it's pronounced that way. Chiricahua Apache blood from my mother's great-grandmother, who was in the Arizona tribe from which Geronimo came. Geronimo's clan fought the intrusion of the Spanish missionaries. We've not indoctrinated Sabrina into atheism as if that were even possible. The last thing a free-thinking family will do is coerce thought. We did not take her to atheist Sunday school, if there even is such a thing, or force her to memorize Bertrand Russell's words. But of course, she has heard Annie Laurie and me talking about our work, and she has attended many of the speeches and events at the Foundation's annual conventions, which amounts to a kind of free thought education, I suppose. In the end, she's her own person, and she knows that she's free to make her own philosophical and political decisions. When I sometimes remind her that she's free to become a born-again Christian or anything she wants, she just snickers and says, "Oh, Dad." My 4 kids from my first marriage are grown now, and the daughters are raising their own children. They have always been very good about the whole controversy. Unless they bring it up or unless it happens to arise in the course of normal conversation, we don't discuss religion. When they visited Wisconsin as children, I offered to escort them to the church of their choice, but they never took me up on it. 2 or 3 times during her high school years, my daughter, Becky, sent me a letter urging me to come back to God, so I know she struggled with the issue. But I have repeatedly told all my children that my love for them is not contingent upon what they believe. They can be Christians if they want, as long as they're good people and don't hurt others. They went to church with their mother, who worked at a Christian school, and their stepfather, a young youth director at a Baptist church and later a pastor. They know what I think. I never wanted them to be forced into a position of having to choose between parents. They're smart kids, and I want to have, and I have to trust that they have the ability to sift fact from fiction and right from wrong. Danny now calls himself an agnostic. As far as I know, the girls, who may harbor some nominal or liberal beliefs, don't seem to go to church regularly. When they were young, I dedicated Just Pretend, a free thought book for children, to them, which says, "No one can tell you what to think, not your teachers, not your parents, not your minister, priest, or rabbi, not your friends or relatives, not this book. You are the boss of your own mind. If you have used your mind to find out what is true, then you should be proud. Your thoughts are free." And like my dad, I've also found a new joy in music. When I moved to Madison, I started playing jazz piano, averaging more than 100 gigs a year since then. This might sound like a Sunday evening church testimony, but I have to say that life has been much richer and happier since I was healed of the religious delusion. As the lyrics to one of my songs says, "The superstitious monkey is off my back. I'm thinking for myself and I'm back on track. And I can tell you, life is good." Jesus has still not returned and never will, but who needs him? Chapter 4, The New Call.